She told him to go back to Africa. What he said next silenced the entire store. It was supposed to be just another quiet afternoon at the local grocery store. Shoppers drifted through the aisles, ticking items off their lists, chatting in hushed tones, and navigating carts through the maze of produce and canned goods. The sun filtered through the front windows, casting a warm glow on the tiled floor. In this small Ohio town, where faces were familiar and the routine rarely changed, no one expected the silence that was about to fall. Near the produce section, an elderly woman in her late 70s adjusted her glasses with a huff. She looked harmless, faded cardigan, carefully pinned silver hair, but the impatience in her muttering hinted at something colder beneath the surface. A few feet away, a young black man, tall and casually dressed in a blue hoodie and jeans, reached for a bag of oranges. His name was Daryl. He was polite, quiet, and moved through the store with the ease of someone used to blending in. One hand balanced a basket full of groceries. The other thumbed through messages on his phone. Then it happened. The woman noticed Daryl and froze. Her expression hardened. Eyes narrowed, lips pursed into a tight, bitter line. Without warning, and loud enough for nearby shoppers to hear, she snapped, "You people don't belong here." Daryl stopped mid-text. He looked up slowly, his brow furrowed. Before he could respond, she added, sharp, unapologetic, "Why don't you go back to Africa where you came from?" Time seemed to freeze. A mother tugged her child away. A man near the potatoes paused mid-reach. Some shoppers glanced up in discomfort. Others pretended not to hear. The cheerful rhythm of the store had come to a screeching halt, replaced by a heavy, stunned silence. Daryl's initial reaction was one of disbelief. He didn't shout. He didn't storm off. Instead, he stood there completely still, weighing his response like someone holding back a tidal wave. He took a breath, a long, quiet breath, and set his grocery basket down on the floor. The woman didn't flinch. Her stance remained defiant, chin lifted like she was daring him to say something. A young employee stacking bananas nearby froze in place. A cashier leaned forward, trying to catch every word. When Daryl finally spoke, his voice wasn't angry. It was calm, so calm it cut through the silence like a blade. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "do you even realize what you just said?" There was no accusation in his tone, just a calm, reflective challenge. A chance for her to think, but she didn't hesitate. "I said what I said," she snapped, her voice rising. "This is my country. People like you don't belong here." A young woman near the bread aisle audibly gasped. Several others turned to watch, no longer pretending to ignore the moment. Still, Daryl didn't react with rage. He didn't raise his voice or take a single step closer. He stood there, composed, and let the silence do its work. Then he nodded once. "All right," he said. "Let's talk about that, since you brought it up." His posture straightened. His presence filled the space. It was as if gravity itself pulled every eye toward him, not out of spectacle, but out of sheer quiet strength. "You said I don't belong here," he continued, his voice low but unwavering. "Let me tell you about where I come from." The store seemed to shrink around him as he spoke, his words landing like carefully placed stones, steady and unshakable. "My great-great-grandfather was born in Mississippi," he said. "He was a sharecropper, worked land he didn't own, broke his back just to give his children a chance at a better life." He paused long enough for the weight of those words to settle. His father? He was a slave, kidnapped, beaten, bought and sold like furniture. And for what? To help build the very country you're standing in. The woman clenched her bag of apples tighter, saying nothing, but the people around her leaned in, silently captivated. "My grandfather fought in World War II, Daryl said, voice rising slightly. "He risked his life for a country that sent him to war, but wouldn't let him sit at a diner when he got back. Couldn't use the same restroom, couldn't drink from the same water fountain." The crowd was completely still now. Even the hum of the refrigeration unit seemed to quiet down. "But he stayed," Daryl continued. "He stayed because he believed in this country, even when it didn't believe in him." He paused again, his eyes steady. "And my parents? They fought too, not with guns, but with dignity, working every day, raising me to believe in respect, hard work, and kindness. My mother's a teacher." Daryl stood tall, his eyes still locked on the woman whose words had shaken the room just moments earlier. But there was no anger in his gaze, only a quiet sadness and strength. My mother, he continued, has spent her entire life helping kids. Every kind, every background. She doesn't care what they look like. She just cares that they learn. He paused, letting the weight of that truth land. And my father? He's a mechanic, the kind of man who'd pull over on the side of the road to help someone, even someone like you, if your car broke down. The words weren't cruel. They were compassionate, honest, and piercing. He let a breath settle between them, the silence wrapping around the two like a rope pulled tight. Then he spoke again, quieter now. So when you say I don't belong here, when you tell me to go back to Africa, you need to understand something. He shook his head, a faint trace of sadness threading through his voice. I am just as much a part of this country as you are, maybe even more, because my family didn't just live here. They bled for it. They worked for it. They endured it. The woman's face flushed. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her apples tighter. She opened her mouth as if to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat. Darrell took a step back, his voice now carried across the aisle, addressing everyone, not just her. I could have walked away, he said, scanning the crowd now fully gathered. But what would that change? Ignorance doesn't fix itself in silence. And if we really want to be better, we have to call this out. All of us. The silence that followed wasn't awkward now. It was reverent. The weight of his words pressed into the walls and lingered in the air. The elderly woman's face was a complex tangle. Part anger, part embarrassment, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of shame. She glanced around the store, perhaps hoping someone might come to her defense. But no one did. A man in a worn baseball cap took a step forward. He's right, the man said simply, voice low but firm. We do have to be better than this. That was all it took. The dam cracked. An older woman near the frozen foods aisle nodded, her eyes misty. My daddy fought in that same war, she said softly. He used to say the only color that matters is the red on our flag. A soft murmur rippled through the store. Acknowledgement, agreement, solidarity. From the checkout lane, a young cashier called out, I've never seen anyone handle something like that with so much grace. Thank you, the elderly woman, now visibly shaken, clutched her cart tighter. She didn't apologize, but her stance had changed. The fire in her eyes had dimmed. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. I didn't mean, she started but stopped herself, as if even she knew that wasn't enough. Darrell turned to her again. This time his tone was gentle. It's not about what you meant, he said. It's about how it came across. Words matter. Actions even more. A man from the deli counter clapped once, slow, hesitant. Then another joined in, and another, until the store echoed with applause, not out of celebration, but out of respect. They clapped for what Darrell had said, for the way he said it, for the courage to confront hate without matching its heat. The elderly woman looked around one last time. Her shoulders were slumped, her face pale. Without another word, she turned her cart and headed slowly toward the exit. As she walked away, a few people moved toward Darrell. One woman placed a hand gently on his shoulder. Thank you, she said, her voice full of emotion. Thank you for saying what needed to be said. Darrell nodded, lifting his basket back into his hand. His voice was low, almost to himself. Sometimes it's not about winning or losing, he said. It's about making sure the truth is heard. The crowd began to disperse, the noise of everyday life slowly returning. But the atmosphere had shifted. The energy was different, quieter, more thoughtful. The store hadn't just witnessed a confrontation, it had experienced a reckoning. Darrell finished his shopping, his steps steady, his mind still deep in reflection. The moment hadn't shaken him, but it had left a mark. At the checkout, the young cashier, who had spoken earlier, greeted him with a shy smile. As she scanned his items, she leaned forward slightly. What you said back there? She hesitated, then continued. It meant a lot. People don't usually stand up like that, not with that kind of grace. Darrell smiled, his voice warm. Sometimes grace is the only way through, he said. Anger just builds walls. But grace? Grace can open a door. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the parking lot. As Daryl walked toward his car, something caught his eye. The elderly woman was still there, sitting behind the wheel of her car, hands tightly gripping the steering wheel. She wasn't yelling now. She wasn't speaking. She was just still, watching, processing. Maybe for the first time in a long while. Daryl saw her in the parking lot, still sitting motionless behind the wheel of her car, hands clenched around the steering wheel. For a moment he considered walking over, saying something more, but he stopped himself. Some lessons don't land in the moment. They need time to sink in, and he had already said what needed to be said. That evening, Daryl sat across from his father at the kitchen table, the familiar smell of fried onions in the air. He recounted everything, the confrontation, the silence that followed, the crowd's response. His father, a man of quiet wisdom, listened without interrupting, his hands folded calmly in front of him. When Daryl finished, there was a moment of stillness. Then his father leaned forward, his voice steady. "You did the right thing, son. Not just for yourself, but for everyone who was watching." He paused, then added, "People like her, they don't change overnight. But you planted something. That's how change starts. You plant the seed, and you let it grow." Daryl nodded slowly. His father's words hit home. The moment at the grocery store had been raw, uncomfortable, but necessary. He realized that silence would have been easier, but it would have allowed ignorance to linger. Instead, he had chosen to confront it, with truth and with grace. Across town, the elderly woman sat alone at her dining table. Her dinner sat untouched. Her hands rested in her lap, and Daryl's voice replayed in her head. Not in anger, but in clarity. Every word had peeled back a layer she hadn't known was there. She thought of her grandchildren, of the world they were growing up in, of the things they might one day hear or say if she didn't break the cycle. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel: doubt. In the days that followed, the story of what happened at the grocery store began to spread throughout the community. People talked. They spoke not just about the confrontation, but about how Daryl had handled it. The dignity, the calm, the courage. It wasn't just an incident anymore. It had become a lesson, a reminder of how powerful words can be, of how silence can be broken without shouting, of how truth, when spoken with purpose, can echo longer than hate. Daryl didn't go looking for attention, but it found him anyway. Strangers approached him at the gas station, the barber shop, even the post office. They thanked him. Some shared their own stories, of moments they stayed silent, of moments they wished they'd spoken up. His quiet stand had done something no speech could. It started conversations that had long been buried. And the elderly woman? She began to change too, not all at once, but quietly. She found herself rethinking things she'd never questioned. She read more, listened more, thought more, and though she wasn't sure if she'd ever see Daryl again, if she did, she hoped she'd have the courage to say the words she should have said that day. "I'm sorry." Moments like this remind us of something powerful, that kindness is not weakness, that truth doesn't need to be loud to be heard, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply stand up and speak with love and conviction. To everyone watching, let this be your reminder. Your words and actions matter. They can divide or they can unite. They can hurt or they can heal. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Together, let's spread messages of hope, courage, and understanding, and help build a world where compassion speaks louder than hate.